The boy was a paradox, a living statue carved from equal parts myth and muscle. In the crisp Moscow air of the summer of 1928, he stood before a delegation of wide-eyed foreigners not as a child, but as a symbol. His name was Vostok, though that was not the name given to him at birth. It was a title, bestowed, like a medal pinned to his chest. It meant East, and he was the dawn of a new humanity, or so they wanted the world to believe. The men staring back at him were not easily impressed. They were German trade unionists, social democrats, hardened realists who had come to the nascent Soviet Union to inspect the progress of the great socialist experiment. They expected to see factories, collective farms, and the grim determination of a people building a new world. They did not expect a 4-year-old boy who could perform gymnastics with the precision of a seasoned acrobat. Vostok's guardian, a scientist named Nikolai Krasnogorsky, watched with a quiet, proprietary satisfaction. This was his masterpiece, the ultimate proof of his theories. With a nod, he instructed the boy to begin. What followed was not the clumsy, endearing play of a preschooler, but a disciplined exhibition of physical prowess. Vostok walked a narrow bench with the balanced grace of a tightrope walker. He swung from a horizontal ladder, his small hands gripping the cold metal with unexpected strength. He somersaulted, jumped, and followed complex commands with a focus that was, for his age, utterly unnerving. He did not smile. He performed. One of the Germans, a man named Karl, skeptical of what he deemed a circus act, devised a small test. He placed a coin on the floor and, when Vostok's back was turned, covered it with a hat. He then asked the boy where the coin had gone. The room fell silent. This was a test of object permanence, a fundamental cognitive milestone that most children master by age 2. But Krasnogorsky had trained Vostok for more complex tasks than this. The boy, confused by the simplicity of the question, merely stared. Karl, believing he had exposed a flaw, a developmental delay hidden beneath the physical glamour, pressed him. Finally, Vostok, with a slight shrug, pointed not to the hat, but to the man's own pocket. A ripple of laughter went through the room. The German, flustered, reached into his coat and found the coin he had forgotten was there. Vostok had not failed the test. He had transcended it. He had answered not the literal question, but the practical one. Where is the coin now? The anecdote was perfect, and it would be told and retold, burnishing the legend. But it obscured a more profound and unsettling truth. Vostok was not just a well-trained child. He was the most famous subject in a radical, state-sanctioned program that sought to answer a question that had haunted philosophers and scientists for centuries. How much of a human being is destiny, and how much is design? The Soviets, in their zeal to create the new Soviet man, were attempting to forge him in the nursery. Vostok was their first and greatest prototype. And like any prototype, his entire existence was an experiment, the controls and variables of which were dictated not by nature, but by the relentless will of his creators. The theoretical architect of this new world was a man named Ivan Pavlov. By the late 1920s, Pavlov was a titan of science, a Nobel laureate whose work on canine digestion had accidentally unlocked the principles of the conditioned reflex. His experiments were elegant in their simplicity. A bell rings, food is presented, the dog salivates. Repeat this enough times, and the bell alone, the conditioned stimulus, will trigger the salivation, the conditioned response. The implications for understanding the mechanics of the mind were staggering. In the West, Pavlov's work was seen as a cornerstone of a new, objective psychology. But in the Soviet Union, it was seized upon as something far more, a political and social toolkit. If a dog's behavior could be so precisely engineered, why not a human's? The chaotic, unpredictable, and often bourgeois human spirit could be retooled into a rational, collective, and socialist mind. Pavlov himself was apolitical, often clashing with the Bolshevik authorities, but his science was irresistibly co-opted. It provided a seemingly irrefutable, materialist basis for the creation of a new society, one reflex at a time. This is where Nikolai Krasnogorsky entered the stage. A former student of Pavlov's, he was a physiologist with a singular obsession, applying the master's principles to the developing human brain. He believed that the complex tapestry of human behavior, speech, thought, social interaction, was nothing more than a chain of conditioned reflexes, woven together from the moment of birth. To prove this, one needed a controlled environment. One needed a child who could be observed, measured, and conditioned from infancy, free from the corrupting influence of the old world. The opportunity arrived not from a planning committee, but from tragedy. In 1924, a woman died in childbirth in a Leningrad hospital. The father was unknown, or at least absent. The newborn boy was, in the clinical terminology of the state, a surplus. He was transferred to a detdom, a children's home, a place for the orphans of revolution and civil war. He was given a name, Volodya, a common diminutive for Vladimir. He was, for all intents and purposes, a blank slate. And for Krasnogorsky's grand experiment, he was the perfect subject. At just 12 months old, Volodya was removed from the detdom and brought into Krasnogorsky's institute. He was not placed in an orphanage, but in a specially designed laboratory environment. He was to be raised by scientists, his every moment a potential data point. His world was one of stimuli and responses, of rewards and reinforcements, meticulously recorded in leather-bound ledgers. He was healthy, he was alert, and he was utterly alone in a room full of observers. He was, though no one would have used the word at the time, a lab rat. The early experiments were simple, direct translations of Pavlov's work. Krasnogorsky focused on the salivary reflex. He fitted the toddler with a delicate capsule against his cheek, connected to a tube that would measure the slightest secretion of saliva. Then came the stimuli, the flash of a light, the sound of a metronome, the sight of a favorite toy. These were paired with the unconditional stimulus, a few drops of sweetened milk or a piece of sugar placed on his tongue. The results, as recorded in Krasnogorsky's notes, were a triumph of behaviorist theory. After repeated pairings, the flash of the light alone would cause Volodya's mouth to water. A new connection had been forged in his brain, a simple circuit of cause and effect. But Krasnogorsky was not content with saliva. He moved on to motor reflexes. He would sound a bell, then gently press the sole of Volodya's foot, causing his leg to jerk. Soon, the bell alone provoked the leg jerk. The child's body was learning to dance to a predetermined tune. This was more than just training, it was an attempt to build the very architecture of perception. Krasnogorsky believed he was mapping the first and second signal systems of the brain. The first system dealt with direct sensory input, the taste of sugar, the feel of a foot press. The second, higher system was unique to humans: language. He began conditioning Volodya to associate words with objects and actions. The word give was paired with the act of receiving a toy until the sound itself triggered an anticipatory grasping motion. The boundaries between the physical and the verbal were being deliberately blurred within the boy's mind. By the age of 3, the conditioned world was Volodya's only reality. His life was a seamless sequence of experiments, lessons, and physical training. He was taught to read early, his vocabulary carefully curated. His play was purposeful, designed to develop coordination, discipline, and a specific kind of problem-solving intelligence. He was rewarded for correct responses, for obedience, for physical excellence. There were no parents to offer unconditional love, no siblings to squabble with, no unstructured time for the mind to wander. His emotional needs were noted as data, frustration, joy, fatigue, but they were not catered to as the needs of a child. They were variables to be managed. It was during this period that the state began to take a more direct interest. Word of the Pavlovian child had filtered up through the scientific bureaucracy to the political one. To men like Leon Trotsky, who had famously written that under communism, man will become immeasurably stronger, wiser, and subtler, and the average human type will rise to the heights of an Aristotle, a Goethe, or a Marx, Volodya was not an experiment. He was a prophecy being fulfilled. He was living proof that the Soviet system could outperform nature itself. He was the future, and he needed a new name. Volodya was a relic of the past. He was christened Vostok, the East, the land of the rising sun. His identity was now fully and officially subsumed by his utility. The pressure on Krasnogorsky intensified. The boy was no longer just a scientific subject, he was a political asset. His performance was a reflection of the system's viability. The carefully controlled environment of the institute began to crack under the weight of expectation. Visits from important officials became more frequent. Vostok was trotted out to demonstrate his skills, each performance a high-stakes exam for both the boy and his creator. It was in this atmosphere that the legendary encounter with the German delegation took place. The story of the coin and the hat was a public relations masterstroke, but it masked a private reality. The boy who could outwit a skeptical German was also a boy who had never known a mother's hug. The child with the iron discipline and preternatural focus was also a child who had no concept of a friend. The conditioning that had built his remarkable abilities had also built walls around his humanity. He could solve a practical puzzle about a hidden coin, but could he navigate the subtle, unspoken rules of friendship, of love, of loss? These were not variables in Krasnogorsky's equations. The German visit was a high watermark. The legend of Vostok, the Soviet superchild, began to spread beyond the borders of the USSR. But within the sterile halls of the Institute, the cracks were widening. The chain of conditioned reflexes that constituted Vostok's personality was beginning to show its weaknesses. A human mind, even a young one, is not a simple machine. It is a complex, emergent system, capable of surprises that no experiment, no matter how well designed, can fully anticipate. The greatest kid of all time was, at his core, still a boy. And a boy, no matter how perfectly conditioned, can still break.